Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
For a lot of these kind of industrial applications, something like PlayScore, the optical recognition, works together with something which can listen to music. So they can marry the two together. So moving around operatic scenery, you'd have something listening to the music and then comparing that to the XML produced by PlayScore.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. My guest today is Anthony Wilkes. Anthony is the CEO of PlayScore, the makers of PlayScore 2 and the optical music recognition library ReadScore Lib that third-party developers can license from PlayScore. This is an app that was mentioned in episode 128 with Daniel Spreadberry. This app lets you snap a photo of sheet music and convert it to a digital file you can work with in apps like Dorico, or use within PlayScore 2 to use as a practice tool to learn a piece of music. In this interview, we dive into how he got into music and technology, the app's origins, how the app is used today, what is next for PlayScore 2, and some of the more interesting uses of that library being licensed to third parties. With that said, I just want to remind everyone that you can now financially support iPad Pros in two different places. First off, patreon.com/iPadPros. Get episodes early and with embedded MP3 chapter markers by supporting the podcast at any tier. Bonus content is also available at the higher tiers. You can also now subscribe to iPad Pros in Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is an all-inclusive single subscription, so you'll get all of the bonus content plus episodes early by subscribing to the show in Apple Podcasts. By default, subscriptions are monthly, but if you go into your subscription settings in the Settings app, you can switch it to a yearly plan. My thanks to everyone that currently or has in the past supported the podcast financially. This podcast is not a quick one to produce, and your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. You can also support the podcast for free simply by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts. No matter your region, it really does help. The reviews help send the right signals to Apple to show this podcast more in search, helping others discover the show. If you have a minute today, I'd really appreciate you opening up the podcast app and leaving a review. My thanks to everyone that has already done that. With that, here's my interview with Anthony. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony. Can you first introduce yourself and kind of how you personally use the iPad, if you do?
Oh, yeah. I'm Anthony Wilkes, and I developed the optical music recognition in the PlayScore 2 app. I love the iPad. With an app like PlayScore 2, you can use it on a phone, and it's real handy for taking pictures of music and listening. But on the iPad, you can really see a good page of music, and it's a device that's absolutely enough to play from on a music stand or on the piano. And so having PlayScore accompany you maybe on an instrument, I'm a cellist myself.
Yeah.
I love that. And probably the iPad is probably the best tablet for doing all that good stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. And as a cellist, do you use Fourscore and PlayScore like when you're sitting at a music stand or a piano working on a performing or playing?
Well, personally, I still I do a lot of chamber music and orchestral playing, and I don't use a device at the moment for that. I think it'll come, but it'll probably come as all the players begin to use that.
Right. Yeah.
But I use it a lot for things like accompaniment, and especially in my case for analysis. So if you've got a string quartet and you want to show the inner parts that they're not quite dovetailing perfectly, then PlayScore is a great way to do that, because you can just pull out the two inner parts and start anywhere in the piece you like. And so it's a real help for working on a string quartet.
Excellent. Yeah. So your background obviously is with music. And when was it in your life that you decided this was a need in the world, that this app, digitizing music, just taking a photo of a piece of music and turning that into something you can work with on the computer, something that needed to exist?
Well, it was around 2005 that I started thinking about this seriously. I the idea of OMR, optical music recognition. There were optical music recognition applications at the time, but they weren't very good and they didn't sound very good. And it seemed the whole idea of this just seemed like magic to me. I just had this. Of course, this was before devices and apps, but I had this idea both that it could be wonderful in playing music, but also, and that at that time Google were digitizing the world's libraries. And I thought, well, what about music libraries? And so I realized that this would be a wonderful thing, and also that there was an opportunity there. So I guess around 2005.
Those were definitely early days. You'd need to use scanners because back then the cameras on, like, there wasn't even an iPhone, but cell phone cameras were kind of laughably bad back then.
Yeah, just starting, yeah.
Yeah. So what were the ambitions for the original app, and how's the app kind of improved over the years to what it is today?
Well, my first project actually was to create a library that developers generally could use to build into applications for the sort of things that we've been talking about, but also for a much wider set of things, like, for example, automatic page turning, and also we'll maybe talk about this later, but some things which you perhaps you wouldn't think of, like controlling operatic lighting, for example. And so my focus was on creating a library. But I mean, a digital library, something which developers could build into any kind of app, and that was the first. That was the first thing I tried to do. And of course, when apps came along, it was an ideal opportunity to do a demo, to demonstrate this technology.
Right.
And at that moment, little did I think that the app would become such a big part of this. So originally, the app was just PlayScore, what we like to call PlayScore Classic. A very simple app, a black screen with two buttons, which would just take a picture of music and play it back to you. And the purpose of that was to be a demo for our OEM customers.
That makes total sense. Yeah. And I'm guessing people saw the main app and were like, "Oh, this is great. We want more out of this."
Yeah, that's basically it. The app, we didn't expect this, but the app kind of got a life of its own, and it started. There was a free one, and then there was one for a few dollars, which would export music XML, and we had quite a few people buy it, and a lot of comments from people, because the app at that time was pretty much a toy. It was a demo,
Yeah.
and people were requesting all sorts of features, and we thought, okay, well, we've got to take this a bit more seriously, and that led to PlayScore 2. PlayScore 2 started out as an app which would do what the original demo app did, plus multiple pages and PDF scores, but not a great deal beyond that. And subsequent releases over the last 3 years, it's now a fully featured, a serious tool for musicians. So it's come a long way.
Yeah, it's a tool that I used recently. Someone very close to me is starting to take voice lessons, and the instructor sent over a PDF of the piano and voice, and she wanted to hear the piano behind her as she was practicing. And this was a great tool to do that, because we didn't have the audio recording, just the PDF to work with.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, PlayScore's used a lot by it's actually used a lot by choirs and singers who maybe want to pull out their own particular part. So the conductor will prepare 4 PlayScore documents: one for alto, one soprano, tenor, and bass, and each of those will have that particular part pulled out against maybe the other parts in the background, or maybe not there at all, and the conductor sends that out to the singers, and the singers can interact with the music. They can tap where they want. They can create little loops and go faster and slower. All the things really you need to practice your part.
Yeah. Now, something I was trying to do is just get a straight audio export from PlayScore, like an MP3. I tried working with MIDI exports and using other apps to get the audio, but PlayScore's playback engine is just so good. It was something that I'm kind of curious about is, do you guys envision eventually allowing just straight audio out of the app as a file you can send to people to export their PlayScore documents in that way?
Well, that's really interesting you should ask that, and it's certainly something the app should and will have. But our usual, well, the way we think of this is that the design, the sort of commercial design of PlayScore is a bit like other formats like PDF itself. In fact, that at least as it was originally, that it's that you pay something to create a document, but you don't have to pay to use the document to play it back. And so now we're on Android, and will, I hope before long, be on PC and Mac. Anybody will have access to the free download and can play back anywhere. So that kind of largely obviates the need for at least in most situations, we figured that was the way it was, that was a sort of better answer to that question. But maybe we've overlooked something there.
Okay. Yeah, so the idea is you just tell the person, download this free app and here's the file. And the great flexibility you gain there is you're able to adjust playback parameters and do the loops that you're talking about, and really be a better tool than just the audio file.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah.
So, and people like it, of course, because for a whole choir, it's just one subscription for the conductor, and it's free for everybody else.
Yeah, and this is a tool that I would have killed for back in high school. I did saxophone ensemble, arrangements. I'd be expanding from like a piano piece, or contracting from an orchestral or band piece. And just the act of trying to get these scores digitized to work with the melodies and the notes was a very time-intensive process. What kind of feedback have you gotten from arrangers and people that are orchestrating music? Is this a tool being used to do this kind of work?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one big. I would say our user base is broken. The three big chunks are choirs and pulling out parts we've been talking about, accompaniment, people who want an accompaniment for practicing, and arrangers, composers who use the app primarily to get music into an editor like MuseScore, or the one I use a lot, Dorico, which is and of course, with the power of some of these things, especially Dorico, which is a terrifically powerful thing, and now on the iPad as well, and works really well on the iPad. You really can just photograph a score and see it in seconds. I mean, really just seconds in Dorico. With the new release, with all the text and lyrics, they're immediately there, and of course, that's so much more powerful than the old days when we used to. What we used to go through. We'd have to do all this by hand.
Yeah.
Both on the scanning end and on the editing end.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what kind of what should people expect from the scanning process? Like a huge score? Does it matter how many staves are in the score for how the success rate will be? Are jazz scores a bit trickier because of the notation being a bit less conventional versus classical scores?
Okay. Well, for photograph music, if you're using the camera, I think chamber music is about the limit.
Okay.
Probably, because you can imagine in a big score, orchestral score, there's an awful lot of detail there.
There is, yeah.
And it's very difficult to capture that with a handheld camera. So I would say that after that size of score, you want to go to a professionally produced PDF.
Yeah.
Some of those on IMSLP or those direct from the publisher. And in theory, there are no limits in PlayScore. It ought to be able to find all the staves and everything. There is some a couple of controls in the app which will allow you to increase the scale. It's called sampling. There's a sampling slider in the control panel, and you can increase that to get more out of a dense PDF. So that can help. So there's nothing intrinsically. Of course, the other thing with big scores is transposing instruments. And there's this is a transposing, and the different things people mean by that term is quite a complicated subject, and there are 3 or 4 quite different meanings. But if you have a score with transposing instruments, PlayScore, if you turn on auto transposition, PlayScore should make sense of that. But there are exceptions, and those exceptions are mainly for transposing brass, that when they don't use key signatures.
Yeah.
I won't go into technicalities of all this, but you can read all about it in our help. And so there are some things you can do automatically, some things you can do manually, and some things you can't do at all yet.
Okay.
Another problem with big scores is that they'll have systems which represent just some of the instruments. So you might have 10 instruments on one page and then perhaps 2 on the next page.
Right.
And there's not always enough context information there for PlayScore to be able to figure out which match which. So that's another thing you might have to edit afterwards.
Right.
These are all things we're working on. We're very aware of that particular last one.
Gotcha. Yeah. And as far as jazz notation, is there any struggles there with it not using the standard font, I guess?
Yes. Well, if you're referring to, there's a kind of, PlayScore doesn't handle handwritten music,
right?
And nor does it handle music which is kind of printed to look like handwritten music. Yeah. So these are sometimes called jazz fonts. It's not something we've done. I think we will do it, but I'm not aware of any notation editor, no scanner rather, that can do this at the moment. Although I don't know, you might not know this, but while I've been developing this technology, I also took a bit of time out to write the handwriting engine for Neurotron's Notate Me, and that's handwriting, and that will accept, will to a certain extent handle jazz scores, but of course handwriting recognition is in its infancy.
Yeah.
So I think that this is something which isn't there yet, but will come.
Okay. Yeah, it seems long term, like partnering with the people that make these fonts, you could probably do some work, and like you could have a different font library for the fake handwritten stuff from jazz scores, perhaps in the future. Yeah,
it's that I concluded that's not quite the way to do it. The music is so incredibly varied.
Yeah.
I mean, most people know the kind of music they play, but if you're someone like me who's working with all kinds of music, and you look through the scores I've got, which are millions of scores, you see how incredibly varied they are. How a Wagner vocal part, let's say, and a hymn book, and a rock piece with drums. I mean, these things are totally different, and so you can't really you can't really look for individual fonts or anything of that sort, especially going back 300 years. Yeah. What you really have to do is to look at music generally, and so handling jazz fonts will probably come out of handling music more widely in many directions over many dimensions.
Yeah, and that work will also probably improve the standard recognition in that process by making it just being able to look at more music in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the aim being to handle not only a wider and wider field of different types of music, but also music of poorer and poorer quality. I mean, image quality.
Yeah. I remember in band having some very horrible looking photocopies that were a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and that's what you're trying to work with.
That kind of thing, yes. That's the sort of thing we're working on all the time. And we inch forward. There's a good step in the new release, which represents nearly 18 months development there.
Excellent. And in that new release, you also mentioned OCR. So you not only have optical music recognition, but optical character recognition for text. So as you mentioned, for vocal stuff, you don't need to be writing in the lyrics anymore. That stuff will come along for the ride, which is an excellent addition.
Yes. You have to switch it on. It's in the control panel. But once you switch it on, it should pull in all the lyrics. It should pull in directions, titles to some extent. But remember, this is music XML. Guitar chords in many cases. All kind of things like that.
Is tempo something it brings in, if it's tempo not in like 70 equals quarter note, but instead like allegro, will that be now recognized by this system?
Okay. This is the plan. Our first step was to incorporate optical character recognition to do all the things I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Now that does not include actually interpreting those things in playback. It certainly interprets dynamics and articulation and that kind of thing in the hairpins and the like in the playback. But in this version, things like allegro or crotchet equals are not interpreted for playback. Okay. That's the next step. Yeah. You'll see that in a future release, probably later this year.
Okay, very cool. For the iPad version, is it just expanding on what the iPhone screen is able to show you? Any particular enhancements for the iPad, and especially the larger 12.9-inch screen iPad?
The app isn't different, actually. The app is exactly the same for iPhone and iPad. But of course, the effect on that device is vastly superior on the iPad, not only from the visual point of view, from the audio point of view, because the audio is much better, and I think the playback sounds miles better on the iPad. But the app itself, it tries to deal with the different issues and problems connected with those two devices. It tries to deal with that in one app. So it'll make choices, but you don't need a different app for it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So at the very beginning of the conversation, we spoke about the third-party apps that are able to use the ReadScore library. Are there any notable examples of this yet?
Yeah, there are a few. We tend to prefer to license the app to developers that aren't going to produce a direct competitor to PlayScore. I must admit that, but there's a nice piano practice app called Halberstude. It's from a German group of developers, which is a very nice app. You take a picture of your piano music and it lays it out for you, and it's all aimed at learning the piano. Okay. It's used as a kind of vertical market. Mm-hmm. There's another good one called Harmony Helper, which is a group of people in New York, and that's for aimed specifically at musical theatre and for people who don't read music. So it shows the music in a kind of MIDI layout, if you understand me. Yeah. It's a kind of graphic layout which isn't music. There's a couple of apps. There are some Chinese ones too, but mostly. We don't have a huge number. We're quite careful about whom we license the technology to, partly because of the issues of piracy and the like, particularly in China. But we have quite a few kind of what I term OEM industrial users who use it for things like page turning and one very interesting one to do with operatic lighting and scenery, which is very, very much experimental, but that's an interesting direction. For a lot of these kind of industrial applications, something like PlayScore, the optical recognition, works together with something which can listen to music, so they can marry the two together. So moving around operatic scenery, you'd have something listening to the music and then comparing that to the XML produced by PlayScore, and putting the whole thing together so it can work to a script for the lights, for example.
That's super cool. Yeah, automating that so it's less Yeah, Cedar Pants. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to the Met and see the stage they've got there, that amazing stage,
Yeah.
you can just do anything. I mean, the possibilities are vast.
Yeah, I remember working in theater in high school and being in that light room and just like the amount of knobs and stuff and all the kind of cues to change stuff was a lot. So I can imagine that even just with opera and larger scale stuff, just that being a huge win.
Yeah, I too. At one point when I was a student, I had a job working in a theatre operating the lights, and it's more complicated than you'd expect, isn't it? And also a lot of opportunities for making a mess of it and turning on the light at the wrong time, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
You have to watch out for that.
Yeah. For the playback engine, there's a bunch of different virtual instruments. They all sound really great. What's has been your process for getting playback right in the app and offering different settings for playback? So when you're practicing it, it's a good tool for that.
Well, we put a lot of effort early on into making the playback as musical as we could. And that the key to that is to making it continuous, so it's not jerky, so that it keeps the beat. Because the first thing in playing music, the rhythm is the basis of music, isn't it? It comes before melody, it comes before harmony. The rhythm is what's sort of built into it, and that's the key to good playback. And then you can go a long way with just doing what the composer said. And not every performer does that.
Yeah.
But if you follow the composer's instructions, that is generally a very good guide to how to make good sounding music. And then beyond that, we do a lot of things like being careful about the kind of grace notes or the kind of staccato in different circumstances or the little turns and things. All those details which make it kind of musical. And finally, we went to a lot of trouble to get the right instruments and nice sounding instruments. The piano, I think, is great in PlayScore. It's not a standard MIDI piano. I think it's a good piano, and some of the other instruments, some are better than others, but the flute, for example, is lovely. So those things together, that's playback. There's not a great deal you can do to change the quality of the playback, other than, of course, you can adjust. Well, you can adjust the volume of every stave, and in fact, you can adjust the volume independently if you've got two parts on the stave.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you've got different instruments, so you can orchestrate. That's so you can try out different orchestrations. You can turn a string quartet into a wind quartet. And you can alter the speed, of course. So that gives you some flexibility.
Okay, yeah. And for the tempo, I know there's a way to like loop music for repeats. For tempo changes, is there a way to tell it at X part in this PlayScore file, change it to this tempo, and at this bar, change it back to that tempo? Is that something that's in there or something being worked on?
Well, that will come when we start interpreting the text.
Okay.
And the crotchet equals notation.
Okay.
To go beyond that and allow the user to specify tempo changes. Yes, it depends what kind of interest we get for that kind of functionality. I suspect that when you get to that point, one option is to export to something like Dorico, mm-hmm. which has a lot of control of things like that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And for repeats, often repeats have different endings, like first ending, second ending. Is that something you foresee PlayScore handling, or is that something that would be better served by a tool like Dorico to handle?
Oh, PlayScore already does that.
Oh, it does. Okay.
It does, yeah. The handling of that has been improved in the new release, so you'll probably find that's better. First and second endings. It doesn't currently do third endings and fourth endings, and it doesn't act on textual directions like coda. Mm-hmm. But along with other text directions, that's the next step in incorporating optical character recognition.
Okay, excellent. Are there any big big updates you guys are working on outside of the things we've spoken about so far that you're okay sharing at this point?
Well, the new update is represents a vast amount of work, and what comes next? Well, we haven't worked out exactly what the next big release will be, but one of the candidates is a solution for larger scores, as we were talking about earlier, ways of making sure that when one system has 9 instruments and another system has 3, that the right ones are connected up. It certainly does a lot to try and get that right, but it's not always possible to do it. And so some user interface for saying this is the horn here and this is the horn here. So maybe like a little colored dot or something like that,
Yeah.
or so you can marry them up, so that if the instrument names aren't in the score, or there's some if the possibility of confusion, then you can actually specify that and join them up together. Another thing is to complete the support for scores with transposing instruments, to incorporate transposing brass really comprehensively. That would be another thing. And of course, always the ongoing improvements in recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what the whole app is based on. And it does a great job with it in my testing with the couple examples I tried out. As far as your users, what have been some of the coolest stories you've heard from kind of the field and getting like, thank you, this app exists kind of stories? This is how I used it.
Well, there are all sorts of things. Like that. There's an increasing amount of interest from the academic community. There's a group of their optical music recognition is actually quite a well covered field in academia. Surprisingly so. There was a conference in Spain, in one of these international conferences that has the conference in a different place every year. And I gave the keynote, in fact, at the last one in Spain. And they, as well as working on techniques in optical music recognition, a lot of them using neural nets, they're interested in things like the statistical analysis of music from a historical point of view, all the things you can do, a classification of phrases, leitmotifs in Wagner, that kind of thing, that kind of, if you like, big data. Mm-hmm. And with these score libraries like the IMSLP library, which is now huge, it's beginning to be possible to do some of this work on the world's music. But of course, you do need good optical recognition to achieve that. And so that's the connection. So that's one really interesting side of this. Another, right at the other end of the scale, there's a Korean tenor, very good tenor called Charles Kim. And about a year ago, a little more now, about a year ago, he actually during lockdown, he released some videos of him singing all sorts of things, singing Schubert and also singing Wagner, Tristan and Isolde, using PlayScore as the accompaniment. And so his videos, you see PlayScore playing Tristan and Isolde and Charles singing it.
Oh, wow.
And it's really quite successful. So that's I thought that was a really nice use of the app.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Diving back into your background a bit, how did you get into music and develop a love of music?
Well, I didn't come from a musical family particularly. I came from a computing family. My father, Maurice Wilkes, was one of the early computing pioneers and built the EDSAC, which was a big old computer, which was in Cambridge, UK, which was first operational in 1949. So this is a huge machine taking up a floor of a large building, and could do calculations, first real calculations in 1949, and very soon became a service for the whole university, and was at the forefront of all sorts of advances in X-ray crystallography and other things. But as a child, my main interest was in going down to the lab on Saturday mornings with my father and trying to pick up components that I could then use in my own crazy inventions at home. I remember there was the EDSAC 1, the very early computer, had a great big panel of what we call peanut neons. Peanut neons are the kind of valve equivalent of little LEDs.
Yeah.
So there are a panel of these things. They look like LEDs, except they're neon, high voltage. And I hankered after this thing. I so much wanted it. And when the EDSAC was decommissioned, because they needed the space for EDSAC 2, I was in there first, and I was able to go home with that Bakelite panel of peanut neons and make some a weird device with it. So that was my beginnings of my interest in technology. In music, well, I was a keen guitarist as a boy, and in my teens, I spent a couple of years with an early psychedelic band, working professionally around the UK. Not a very well-known band, a sort of supporting type band. I did that between the ages of about 16 and 18, at which point I decided to start taking music seriously. And I went to music college studying cello with, in particular with Rohan Dasaram, who was a wonderful Sri Lankan cellist, and at Trinity College in London. So that's my background in music. I'm also a composer. You can find my compositions on IMSLP. And I've always been an active musician. When personal computers, things like the Apple computer and Commodore PET came out, I started to be seriously interested in software development, and I guess you could say it all started from there.
Yeah. No, fascinating. Yeah, it's fun with those when you have different passions that can intersect like that.
Yeah, it's wonderful what's possible today. It's so exciting.
Yeah, going from a full room computer that takes up a lot of power to handheld devices that are just exponentially more powerful than what you could dream of.
It's just magic. Something like PlayScore it's kind of like magic. It's something that couldn't have been imagined even a decade ago.
Yeah, I remember just probably about it was around 2006 or so, just doing text recognition would cause like a high-end MacBook Pro to spin up its fans, work for hours on end trying to understand from a PDF what text is in here, and now we're able to do music recognition on our phones like instantly. It's baffling.
I know. OCR text recognition took decades to be mastered. The software techniques is not an easy problem.
No.
Not at all. Now it's very good. And the same goes for optical music recognition. It's another order of difficulty on top of that, and people have been working on it for a long time, me included. But it's a fascinating field, and I guess I'm one of those people that I think about what I do all the time, and all I really want to do is just improve this technology and make it better and better. And there's plenty of scope for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything we missed that you'd like to cover before we wrap it up?
I think we've covered it pretty well, Tim, and I think that's great.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, where can people find more information about PlayScore 2?
Okay. From your interview, that's one place. There's our website, of course, playscore.co, and there are a lot of videos on YouTube now. That's on our own channel. You can find videos, but if you just search for PlayScore on YouTube, you'll find an increasing number of them. And of course, you can always write to us, because I personally really love talking to users, and I very much enjoy doing technical support. So emails are very welcome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Anthony. This has just been a delight and just really interesting learning kind of the background of this app and kind of how it can be used.
Well, great to talk to you too, Tim.
Well, that was my interview with Anthony. My thanks to Anthony for his time recording this interview, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. You can support the podcast over at patreon.com/epicpros or by subscribing to the podcast in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.